It's so bizarre and strange, it's hard to describe. I felt so hopelessly evil and perverted. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. When you depersonalize another person and view them as just an object for pleasure instead of a living, breathing human being, it seems to make it easier to do things you shouldn't do.
Hello.
Hey, what's up?
So this is the first chapter of Ashley's little series she's got going on.
And it's gonna be great. Tony the Tiger, great. It is, drumroll please, Jeffrey Dahmer. So I would argue, and maybe some people will come for me on this, but I think Jeffrey Dahmer in American history is the most notorious serial killer of all time. I think that people would be able to tell you more about Jeffrey Dahmer than they would be able to tell you about Ted Bundy from a layman standpoint.
Yeah.
You know, somebody who's not interested in true crime would be able to tell you more about the Milwaukee Cannibal.
As Kanye West said, eat your heart out like Jeffrey Dahmer.
Exactly. So, I was telling Amanda earlier, Jeffrey Dahmer is what got me into true crime. I'd always been into supernatural things, paranormal things. I'd always been very into Egyptology and things like that. So the spooky was normal to me, but Jeffrey Dahmer is what set the stone for me to be interested in things like murder and serial killers and crime, and the psyche of humans when they do kill another human being. And I remember when I found his information, I read his Wikipedia page, and then I spent about 6 hours researching him. So that led to today, fast forward 4 or 5 years, and now I've got about 35 pages on Jeffrey Dahmer for you. So we're going to bust this up. It's going to take us 3 weeks, so the next 3 episodes are going to be me screaming about Jeffrey Dahmer at you. And I hope you enjoy it. It's a lot of good information, and if you really are a true crime fanatic, this is something that you really should know inside and out, because it's one of the most unique cases that I personally think has ever happened in the history of true crime in general, let alone American history.
And to disclose, I know who Jeffrey Dahmer is. I know he was gay. I know he ate only men. And I know that one of his victims almost got out. That's all I know. That's really it.
And that's what most people know, so if that's all you know, don't be ashamed. Because that is the most important part, to know, he was the Milwaukee Cannibal, and he was a homosexual. That's what most people know. So I hope that when you hear this story, it makes you conflicted about, hating him for being a murderer. I hope it interests you enough to see, his side of the story. This is not me excusing Jeffrey Dahmer. I'm going to say it outright. He was a fucking monster. At the end of the day, he was a monster. But I hope that this story intrigues you to see the creation and the life of that monster.
That is what Ashley said. She said, you're going to see Jeffrey Dahmer in a way you never thought you would before, and I'm kind of excited for it. So,
yep. So here we go. Jeffrey Dahmer was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin on May 21st in 1960. He was the firstborn son to his parents, Joyce and Lionel. Dahmer's mom, Joyce, worked as a teletype machine instructor, which if you don't know what a teletype machine is, that's okay. I didn't either. I had to look it up. It's basically one of the first computers, kind of like a telegraph computer type deal. And his dad was a student at the time of his birth at Marquette University for chemistry. So he comes from a very intellectual, intelligent, scientific family. As far as his parents, though, people say he wasn't abused as a child. He wasn't beat or anything like that, but he was very neglected. His father spent most of his time wrapped up in his studies. He wasn't ever really home. And his mom was actually very, stingy with her love and affection and suffered deeply from mental illness. When Dahmer entered the first grade, his mom began to spend an increasing amount of time in bed, saying she was resting from weakness.
Depression, probably.
Depression is probably what it was. Actual physical ailments set on by mental illness. And with his dad, Lionel, being away from home all the time, when he finally did come home, his wife demanded all of his attention. She would reportedly work herself into states of anxiety over trivial matters just to get her husband's attention, which left Dahmer not on the receiving end of any of that attention because it was all wrapped up within his parents. Joyce, his mother, attempted suicide at one point by overdosing on Equinil pills, which then she eventually became addicted to. Consequently, because of all of this, like I said, neither of his parents were really paying attention to him. He never really got attention as a kid. He was, despite all of this, described as a relatively energetic child until about the age of 4, when he ended up having to have a double hernia surgery. Which, hernia is basically when your intestines are poking out of your body. If you don't know what that is, right. It's a lot of stuff. Amanda's about to school us. Let it go.
That sounds really brutal, but so you have your skin layer, and then you have your peritoneum, and then you have your insides. Okay. So when there is an obstruction of your peritoneum, like there's a discrepancy, like a hole, your intestines, or maybe it's just fat, will sometimes slip out through that. Okay. And that needs to be fixed because then eventually you could strangulate your intestines. But it's pretty mild, actually. Yeah. But as a child, I assume... It
can be very painful, I've heard, though.
I assume pediatric surgery wasn't as advanced as it is today.
Back in the 60s, yeah. Right. So it was, for a 4-year-old, surgery of any kind is pretty traumatic. And from what I understood about surgeries, or from hernias when I was reading this, I was like, shit, that's kind of rough. That sucks. They actually didn't... It makes it worse when you find out that they actually didn't tell him he was going to have a double hernia surgery. He did not know what was happening to him until he was literally on the table on the way into surgery. Oh. They didn't tell him what was going on with him. So it was very...
That's
jarring to him.
Yeah, that's your vital learning age, and you're being lied to already.
You're starting to understand things. I have a 5-year-old niece that I care for, and she's very aware of things, and when she was 4, she knew what was going on. So I imagine he was very intelligent at this time. So he had his surgery, and afterwards he was no longer energetic. He was subdued, withdrawn. He was very solitary. Even teachers in school, when he was young, noticed that after his surgery he was acting it as a child would when they were neglected. Mm-hmm. And so they wrote home saying, he acts like a child that's neglected. Nothing was done. He still, however, even though he was kind of a loner, kind of really sad looking, melancholy, he had friends. And these friends later, after the fact, recalled that he was very, from an early age, even before his surgery, was interested in dead animals, and bugs, which is not a weird thing. A lot of kids collect bugs, and if there's a pre-dead animal, they'll play with it. Yeah. So that itself is not weird. They said he would keep large bugs in jars, would dissect roadkill, keeping parts of that roadkill.
See, it's the dissecting and the actually going through and touching
That's when it starts to get a little weird. But even that, I guess in some way I could be well, I guess, maybe if you want to know, how the animal works,
if you got nothing better to do.
Your parents are ignoring you, so you're getting a little scientific, and you're trying to figure out how this animal's put together. Okay, I can rationalize that in my head. I personally would not play with roadkill like that, but I guess he did. At this point, I still think he's a relatively normal kid. He maybe just needs some therapy. Mm-hmm. At first, his father was wow, this is great. He's just another scientist like the rest of us, thinking that it was just scientific curiosity. So Lionel actually himself recalls a time when Dahmer was really young, and he was, Lionel was removing bones from underneath their shed, underneath their house, and Dahmer was obsessed with the sound that the bones were making, being moved and tossed around together. And then that kind of led to him being interested in how the bones fit together with inside a body, which that itself, again, is not he's going to be a serial killer someday.
Right. He might just be an anthropologist.
Right. He's still very... And Dahmer later himself in interviews said, I was very interested in taxidermy. So that itself, it makes sense to his personality, but it started to get real fucking weird. So it went from him just being interested in seeing how bones fit together, with muscle and tendons and stuff inside a body, to him finding a dead dog on the side of the road, as he typically did. And in the I watched a documentary. I've listened to countless podcasts and watched countless documentaries, but the one I specifically used for this research was called Dahmer on Dahmer. It's on Prime, I think. It's $3. It's 2 episodes. Go buy it. It's great. He says that the dog was probably a beagle and that he suddenly, as he was like kind of poking through it like he normally did, he had the urge to know what it would look like on the inside. And then he, quote unquote, had the thought to do something shocking with it. And that, personally, for me, is where everything changes. And it's no longer normal. Because
he was aroused by it?
Aroused, or he just wanted to do something really crazy with the body. Like something that would scare people, scare himself. That, to me, is not normal. Like, if you are having those thoughts, there's something that you need to be working through. There's something you need to be focusing on. So what he did was he nailed the dog's body to a neighbor's tree and then impaled the dog's skull in his backyard with a stake. Again, he was 4. So, this just kept going. His morbid curiosity kept growing. And during that, Joyce, his mom, gave birth to his brother, their second son.
I did not know Jeffrey Dahmer had a brother.
There's a reason.
Oh.
He's not dead. Don't worry.
Oh my god, okay.
He's not dead.
I get kind of scared.
No, he did end up, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, he did end up changing his name, and he lives in anonymous, however you say that word.
Anonymously?
He lives anonymously and doesn't want people to know. He's Jeffrey Dahmer's brother. His parents allowed Dahmer to actually name his little brother, which is kind of hilarious to me. But he chose a relatively normal name. He chose David, so that was his little brother's name. Following the birth of his little brother, Dahmer's father graduated, and he got a job as an analytical chemist in Akron, Ohio. And the family...
What?
And you didn't know this?
No.
And the family then moved to Bath Township in Ohio, which is very, very close to where I live. Dahmer's childhood home is actually only a 10-minute drive from my apartment.
I
And
had no idea.
Amanda and I grew up in Akron, Ohio. So this is a hometown story, kind of, because he does most of his murder in Wisconsin, as we know. So about 2 years after they moved to Akron, one night over a chicken dinner, Dahmer asks his father what it would be like to, what would happen to the chicken bones if they were to be placed in a bleach solution. So at this point, Lionel is like, wow, he's starting to get a little lethargic about life. Like, he's really withdrawn. I don't see him playing with kids much. So he was like, yep, we're going to keep feeding this scientific curiosity. And so he showed him how to safely bleach and reserve the animal bones. And Dahmer kept up this practice and kept avidly collecting bones, literally until the day he was arrested. So fast forward to high school, because his young childhood was about the same. High school comes, he remains placid through his adolescence. His classmates recall him being a bit of an outcast and a troubled kid. What was the most concerning about his behavior, though, was how much he drank beer and hard liquor in high school. He drank daily, and one time he was confronted by another classmate as he was drinking a cup of gin, and he told him, "It's my medicine." So at this point, he clearly is struggling with his mental health, with alcoholism, should be seeking help, but he's just a latchkey kid, and so this never happened.
Right.
He's 14 years old at this point, drinking gin on a daily basis.
I didn't have gin until I was, like, at least 21.
Exactly. And, you know, I had my first drink when I was, like, 16, almost 17, so it's not a weird thing. But
I had my first drink when I was underage. But
exactly.
I didn't know what gin is until...
No, and you do not drink daily when you're underage. At least most people don't. And if you do, that's something you really should seek help with. Mm-hmm. Despite his alcoholism, he was very intelligent, got good grades in high school, but he was socially inept. And at the same time, he also realized he was gay. He never divulged this to his parents, but he did have a relationship with another young man in high school. Reportedly, it didn't last long, and they never had sex. However, around the time that he turned 16, Dahmer began to fantasize about dominating a sexual partner, which in itself is not an issue. This is not me shaming people that like to dominate or like to be dominated. That's normal and that's fine. And if you do it in a safe and healthy environment, good for you. Get yours. But these domination fantasies for Dahmer began to mingle with fantasies about dissecting his sexual partner as he was dominating them. So let me just say it right now, PSA, if you are fantasizing about physically harming to the point of true, like cutting up your body and killing someone, go seek help. Go find someone to talk to about that, please.
There's no way they know what's normal, though. They definitely know it's
They have to.
up.
Well, and you know what? Dahmer he even said in interviews after he got caught, I knew I was not normal.
Right, but it's the desire. It's
yes.
I don't care if I die. I don't care if I go to jail. I just want to do what I want to do.
Yes. And that's what kind of leads me to believe, like I said to you before we started recording, that maybe he was possibly born this way. It's one of those, I think genuinely Jeffrey Dahmer was a nature situation and not a nurture situation, because his environment didn't really seem like one that would turn him into a murderer. Sure, he was neglected, but
right.
It seemed that who he was inherently had these issues.
It was one issue of, like, maybe if his parents paid a little more attention to him, he would have been fine, but they didn't.
And so it just spiraled.
Like, you have an instance where, oh, I found this dead animal, like,
That was the only thing he had. And
right.
So that was what he associated all things with.
The instance of no, like, repercussions of it. Like, there were, like, we've all been obsessed with animals when we were younger. Like, we didn't know what they were. We didn't have them. And in my old house, we had a lot of field mice. We had a lot of field mice. The first time I'd ever seen one, my cat killed it. And my family threw it in the trash, just being like, oh, throw it in the trash. I wanted
pulled
a mouse.
it out of the trash.
I wanted a mouse. I was like, I want to touch it. I want to feel it. I want to see what it is. And I liked how soft it was.
Yep.
I thought, oh, it's so soft.
Oh.
And I put it under my pillow. And my mom came to wake me up in the morning for school. I woke up and I looked at her and I said, Mom, I have a mouse under my pillow. Like, I didn't even think it was wrong. I did not even think it was wrong. I knew it was soft, and I wanted to touch it while I fell asleep because it was soft. And, And my mom thought it was one of my stuffed animals. Like, I had this stuffed guinea pig. Like,
which is so cute because she had guinea pigs later in her life.
Right. like a beanie baby or whatever. And she was like, oh, yeah, okay. And I looked at my pillow, and she wailed.
Oh,
she wailed.
I can't imagine your poor mom.
She screamed. She was like, "What the?" And I knew. I was like, "This is wrong."
But you didn't know that
because I didn't know what death was. I didn't know what death was. And, and then you know what's wrong. But if his parents just let him do it, he would have never known that was wrong.
And I don't want to blame Lionel, for saying, "Wow, my son's interested in science." Like, there was nothing wrong with what Lionel did.
No.
But it gives context to why young Jeffrey Dahmer, maybe very quickly early on in his life, associated these things as being good, because he did not get in trouble for the things that he did because his parents weren't a part of his life.
Or he didn't get attention until he showed that interest, and his dad was like, oh, that's interesting.
And then it got him attention. It was shocking. That's why he wanted to do something shocking with the dog, because how else were they going to pay attention to him?
Right.
He starts to fantasize about having dominating a sexual partner, specifically a male. And then it mixes with, well, what if I cut them up while I was having sex with them? That's pretty cool. I like that. I like dissection. And at this point, he creates his first target in his mind. There's a jogger that he found very attractive. Jogger jogged same time, same place, every day past his house. He knew his routine. This is me reminding you that if you can, be very aware of your surroundings and your routine, because people pick up on it.
Right.
And he started to fantasize making sexual use of this guy's body. He wanted to render the man unconscious. So in order to do this, Dahmer concealed himself in the bushes on the route that he knew the jogger ran. He had a baseball bat in his hand, and he just waited and waited for him to run by. The jogger on that day did not jog by. It was like the first day he had not jogged by.
What a coincidence.
Yes. Dahmer never attempted to try it again after that. And he later stated that this was his first attempt to try to attack another individual. He said he didn't necessarily want to kill him, but he wanted to subdue him and hurt him.
Well, he knew that no one's going to let me hurt them to get my rocks off willingly, so I had to do it unwillingly.
And something we'll learn about Jeffrey Dahmer later is that even if somebody had come to him and said, I am willing to pretend that I am dead for you, to get off, it still would not have been enough.
Yeah.
No. He's still, this weird guy. Nobody has any idea what's going on in his head, but he is still very strange with what people do know. Being regarded as a loner and an oddball among his peers, he actually went to Revere High School. He became something of a class clown among his peers due to the pranks he would regularly stage, some of which were just done to make his classmates laugh, probably to try to make friends. Others were to attract attention, which is what a lot of class clowns, I think, do. The pranks became known as doing a Dahmer, which I feel like I've heard that phrase before. Like, I'm sure they probably still use it, but these pranks included bleeding like a sheep, stimulating epileptic seizures or cerebral palsy, and knocking over items at school and at local stores. So he was just kind of like acting like this weird kid that like couldn't move right, and he would like, maybe in today's world it might have been seen as very offensive what he was doing, but he was emulating
back then
someone.
It was funny.
It was very funny back then. He was emulating someone with like a mental retardation. That's not me using the R word, but that's clinically, like, he was emulating people with...
Right. He thought if I act weird and I act crazy, people are going to think it's funny.
Exactly. So this is, like, around 1977, his grades start to decline, even though he had been previously a pretty good student. And they retrospectively owe this to his alcohol abuse and his continuing, like, apathy and lethargy towards social interactions and school in general. Mm. So his parents hired a private tutor for him. The tutor only had limited success. Like, he basically just was barely making it by. The same year, his parents attended, like, counseling sessions because they were realizing that they had their own fucking problems.
Yeah.
And they couldn't make it work. They tried to say the marriage didn't work. So they decided on a divorce and ended on amicable grounds originally. But then towards the end, they started to fight in the presence of their sons. So the sons did get to see it. And Lionel eventually moved out of the house. So in May of 1978, Dahmer graduated from high school, and a few weeks before his graduation, one of his teachers observed him sitting close to the school parking lot drinking several cans of beer. The teacher then threatened to report the matter, and Dahmer informed him that he was experiencing a lot of problems at home, his parents' divorce not being really paid attention to. The school's guidance counselor at that was very, he was already aware of them. So shortly after the incident, Joyce was awarded custody of her younger son, and they vacated the family presence, moving in with family members of hers. Dahmer, having just turned 18, was legally an adult and therefore was not subject to the custodial considerations. So he stayed in the family home in Bath Township, Ohio, by himself. Mm-hmm. He was alone. So that leads us to his first murder.
He's here?
18 in Ohio.
Here?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And see, I knew there was going to be some things that would like blow your mind.
I had no idea.
Jeffrey Dahmer's first murder was literally 10 minutes from my house. Yeah. And just wait till you hear. Like, I'm going to give a disclaimer now, and I'm sorry if I forget to keep giving disclaimers, but if you're listening to a podcast on Jeffrey Dahmer, you probably already know that it's going to be fucking awful. These murders are horrendous. What he does to their bodies is horrendous. So if you can't handle something like that, don't listen to this podcast because there's literally no way around it.
Yeah.
So Dahmer committed his first murder in 1978 at the age of 18, 3 weeks after he graduated high school. At the time, he was living alone in the family home following a divorce.
You figure he had that freedom now.
He did.
He doesn't have schoolmates. Right. He doesn't have his parents. He has that freedom.
Yep. It was all fresh and new to him. So his dad was living in a nearby motel, and Joyce had relocated at this point to Wisconsin. So his mom was really fucking gone, and his dad was, even when he lived with Jeffrey, was not there.
Right.
So on June 18th, Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Mark Hicks, who was almost 19. Dahmer lured the youth to his house with the context of the two young men drinking alcohol together. So he said, hey, let's go have a good time. Let's go hang out. My parents don't live with me. Mm-hmm. Hicks, who had been hitchhiking to a rock concert in Lockwood Corners, agreed to accompany Dahmer to his house. According to Dahmer, after several hours of drinking and listening to music, Hicks wanted to leave, but Dahmer didn't want him to. And I have 2 points about this. Dahmer himself, in interviews after he was arrested, said, a lifelong fantasy of mine was to pick up a hitchhiker and to have my way with them. Mm-hmm. So he did just that. And to the point of Hicks saying he wanted to leave and Dahmer didn't want him to. We will find this again and again in all of his victims, that he had severe abandonment issues, and we obviously can say that is because his parents were never around. Mm-hmm. He was very alone growing up, and that was a huge part of the way he killed people and his methodology behind it. So in response to Hicks saying, I kind of want to leave, like, I'm done, like, we have fun, bye, Dahmer bludgeoned Hicks with a 10-pound dumbbell. Dahmer was huge. He was 6 foot something, and he was very built. He was very built. Yes, he was very big. So I can't imagine how fucking horrifying that was.
Right.
He later stated that he struck Hicks twice from behind with a dumbbell as Hicks sat on a chair, and when Hicks fell unconscious, Dahmer strangled him to death with the barbell. He then stripped the clothes from Hicks' body before masturbating as he stood above Hicks' corpse, and the following day, Dahmer dissected his body in his basement. He later buried the remains in a shallow grave in his backyard, before several weeks later unearthing the remains and paring the flesh from the bones. He dissolved the flesh in acid before flushing the solution down the toilet. He crushed the bones with a sledgehammer and scattered them in the woods behind his house. So, fun fact about this as well, and Quinn actually told me because we watched the Dahmer on Dahmer together, he had a friend in high school whose dad was a sheriff, and so, like, the Dahmer on Dahmer will tell you, and some documentaries will tell you that at one point, Dahmer tried to dispose of the body somewhere else, and he had the body in a bag in the backseat of his car, and he got pulled over for erratic driving with the body in the backseat. And Quinn's friend in high school, his dad was the cop that pulled him over. Yeah. So, that's a very small, tiny detail, and I'm sure a lot of stories have that, but it's just kind of crazy because we live in this area to know that, like, that all happened here. And 10 minutes from my house is where this guy's ashes were. His body was fucking demolished and spread. Oh, I lost my spot. Whoops. So, yeah. That happened. You know, he has now committed his first murder. And while it's slightly different than the way he does the rest of them, it's pretty on par with how he's going to desecrate the rest of his victims. I have one more little part. After this, it was 6 weeks after he had killed this man. Nobody fucking knows. Dahmer's dad and his new fiance, now that he's trying to remarry, return home, and they discover that Jeffrey is alone at the house. So they kind of try to push him in the right direction, and they have him enroll at Ohio State University. He was hoping to major in business. His sole term, he stayed one term at OSU, was completely unproductive because he was still drinking a ton of fucking alcohol. Actually, when I was watching the Dahmer on Dahmer, there was a former classmate, and she spoke on his alcohol abuse, and she said at one point she actually found him on the sidewalk, and he was, like, almost dead from drinking so much, and she was like, I did not see him following through with his college career, and then he didn't. He received failing grades in Introduction to Anthropology, Classical Civilizations, and Administrative Science, and the only course he was successful at was riflery. He received a B- grade in that course. His overall GPA was a 0.45 out of a 4.0 possibility. On one occasion, his dad paid a surprise visit to his son, only to find him in his room strewn with empty liquor bottles. Despite his father having paid in advance for the second term, Dahmer then dropped out of OSU after just 3 months.
Well, I imagine, like, you go from, oh, let me run on, I want to kill somebody and decimate their body. My dad shows up and is like, go to college.
Let's go to college.
Go to college. I'm not worried about my fucking schoolwork. I'm worried about that I killed somebody.
Yeah.
And I liked it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That's what I'm thinking about right now, Dad.
Right.
So in January of 79, his dad's still like, come on, like, we gotta find something for you, dude. So he pushes Dahmer to enlist in the United States Army, where he trained as a medical specialist for Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. And that, to me, is, like, so fucking funny, because he literally took someone's life and would go on to take many more lives, and he was trained as a medic, meant to save people's lives. But he probably loved it, because he got to learn things like putting needles into people and cutting people open and stitching people back together, which is probably why he probably did pretty good at it. He was stationed in Baumholder, West Germany, where he served as a combat medic in the 2nd Battalion, 68th Armored Regiment, 8th Infantry Division. I'm sorry if I said any of that wrong. According to most reports in Dahmer's first year of service, he was an average or slightly above average soldier. 2 soldiers now have come out and said that they had been raped by Dahmer while being in the Army. One stated in 2010 that Dahmer had repeatedly raped him over a 17-month period while they were both stationed at Baumholder, and another soldier believes Dahmer drugged him and raped him inside an armored personnel carrier in 1979. I watched both of these men get interviewed in the Dahmer on Dahmer, and it's really fucking sad. Like, the one guy was his roommate, and he said that it was torture. He said that it was every day. He said he expected it every day. And he said, people are going to ask me why I didn't say anything. And he said, who wants to go to the rest of the army and say, yeah, Jeffrey Dahmer raped me? And he wasn't even a killer at the time. He said, it's a manly thing you don't want to admit. He said, lots of men get raped in the army. And you don't say anything because you don't want to be considered weak.
Yeah.
And then that other guy that he raped in the carrier actually said that his whole life unraveled. He ended up having to leave the military after that. He ended up divorcing his wife. He struggled with drugs because he could not come to terms with the fact that he had been raped.
And that's the thing. I feel like they need to normalize people talking about that a little more. Because, if it's one time, just go. Just say, hey, I was raped.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's easier said than done. But the longer you let it go on, the more normal it is.
Just tell someone, even if they don't receive it the way you want them to.
Right. Just even getting it off your chest to someone who's willing to accept it, if that's true or not, is the one step towards you saying it out loud.
Yeah.
Say it out loud once, you can say it out loud again.
Yeah.
Until it gets fixed.
Exactly. So, obviously, if you are in the military or if you are not in the military and you're a man and you feel like it's not possible for you to have been raped, it absolutely is.
By a man or a woman.
By a man or a woman.
Mm-hmm.
Anything in between. It is possible for you to be sexually assaulted and for you to be raped. And if you have, please tell someone.
Yeah.
Please tell. It doesn't have to be a police officer.
Put that bitch on gas.
Do it.
Get them. They do not deserve to have to live happily while you live in suffering. You.
Yes.
This is so angry.
Stand up for yourself. You're not less of a man. You're not less of a man, a woman, a person, because somebody has taken advantage of you.
Right.
So tell someone. That being said, he did not get caught for this. They did not come out until much later, but he was still discharged because of his alcohol abuse. His performance deteriorated, and so in March of 1981, he was deemed unsuitable for military service, was discharged from the Army. It was an honorable discharge, as his superiors did not believe that any problems Dahmer had in the Army would be applicable to civilian life. They were fucking wrong. On March 24th of 1981, Dahmer was sent to Fort Jackson, South Carolina for debriefing and provided with a plane ticket to anywhere in the country, which is pretty common when someone is discharged from the military honorably. Dahmer later told the police he felt he could not return home to face his father, so he opted to travel to Miami, Florida, because he was tired of the cold and in an attempt to live by his own means. In Florida, Dahmer found employment at a sandwich shop, and he rented a room in a nearby motel. He spent most of his salary on alcohol and was then evicted from his room because he did not pay. He initially spent his evenings on the beach living as a homeless man while he continued to work at the sandwich shop until finally he phoned his dad and said, "Can I please come back to Ohio?" And that is where we're going to stop, because following this starts a big chain of events in Jeffrey Dahmer's life, and I want to go into detail on all of them, so you'll have to tune in to next week's episode to hear about that.
Wow. I did not know so much about that.
Yeah. It's a wild, and that's like small potatoes compared to the rest of the...
Small. Where's the meat? Where's the meat?
Oh. Pun fucking intended. The meat's coming.
Yeah. Oh my god, that's awful. I never knew that he was ever homeless.
No. And it was very brief, and it was of his own accord. I mean...
I also never knew that he was an alcoholic,
And keep in mind, in case any of you forgot, did my computer just die? Well, whatever, it's fine. I'll plug it in. In case any of you forgot, he's 19 at this point, 19, 20. I'm 23. I cannot...
Oh, I couldn't imagine just graduating high school and killing someone.
I can't imagine killing someone now. I
can't imagine killing someone
But
ever.
no, you're right. When I first graduated high school, I don't even fucking remember what was going on when I graduated high school.
Right. I was worried about, getting a job somewhere. And...
keeping my relationship through my freshman year of college, which I did not. What?
Right. Oh my gosh.
So it's a lot, and that's kind of why I like the Jeffrey Dahmer story, because it's bigger than Jeffrey Dahmer. There's a lot of things the people he raped in the military. That's a very small section of his story, but it's a big deal. He did so much more than just, kill 17 men who were not even all homosexuals.
And it's also one thing to be sexually assaulted and be like, okay, that was an experience I had. It's another thing to be sexually assaulted and know that everyone knows your abuser.
Exactly.
Everyone knows
Exactly.
them. And then it's like, it's a whole other battleground.
Are they going to believe you, or are they just going to say you're doing it for the notoriety of being able to say I was raped by Jeffrey Dahmer?
Right. Or people casually talking about it, or casually seeing documentaries about it. Like, it's constantly there. Mm-hmm. And it's like, national news, you know, and that's something very personal to you. Yeah.
It reminds me of like Ted Bundy's one girlfriend, Liz, who was very prominent in his life. Like, she had to watch the coverage of everything he did to all these women. And that's a lot for people to handle. He affected so many people in so many ways from a very, very young age in his life.
Yeah. And
he was not very old when he died, as we will find out. So he did all this in a very short span of time.
Ooh, okay.
So that's the part 1 of Jeffrey Dahmer. I hope it was interesting enough for you to stay tuned, especially all you super Jeffrey Dahmer fans like me. I know that sounds weird to say, like, Jeffrey Dahmer's my favorite serial killer. Don't come for me by me saying that. I say that because the story of what he did and how horrendous he was is so fascinating to me, because I am so far removed from the kind of person Jeffrey Dahmer was that I don't understand it, and I want to understand it so I can avoid it.
The mentality is intriguing.
Yes.
And the depth of the story is intriguing.
Yes.
And the fact that people can so casually do things like that is intriguing.
Yes.
So I understand.
Yes. Yes. So if you, quote unquote, love Jeffrey Dahmer as much as I do, please tune in next week. We'll do part 2, and I would like it to be all of his murders leading up to the moment he was captured. So hopefully next week is very juicy.
So juicy. All right. Ashley flicked her tongue at me.
I did.
Okay. All right. So our plugs. You can find us on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Podbean, Anchor, literally any platform. And if there's not a platform you can find us on, email us at crimeinthecoconut@gmail.com. You can tell us, your own stories, experiences, something you want us to talk about, a platform you'd like us to see us on. Mm-hmm. What about social media?
We're on Twitter at CITC Podcast. We're funny. Follow us. We're on Instagram at crimeinthecoconut. We're pretty. Follow us. I think that's all of our social media for the time being. We don't have a website or anything yet, but maybe someday. Who knows? If you love us enough. Like Amanda said, if we're not on a platform that you want to see us on, that you prefer listening to podcasts on, let us know. We will do our best to redirect ourselves to make sure we're available there for you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.